So this year I started seminary, and in my church history class I didn't get the journal done that I was supposed to write. So I wrote a series of poems, and I fortunately passed the course. It's starting from the history of the French settlement in Quebec until the present day. This one is about the early encounters between the English and the French. I met an Anglican today, and I snuck into their church. The English, I don't really understand the people or their language. Their church service seemed like ours, but Protestant, but not. I'm a Franciscan, and I was sent here, and now I stay, and now the English are everywhere. Though I think this is where I will live, between the here and the ocean, and on out past into Montreal. And we're from France, but we're no longer of France. And our identity is found in this land called Quebec. And the faith we preserved, well, this is our country now. Unlike some who only came for gain, to disappear again, seeking money, but not a new life. The English, will they stay? Will we learn to live with them? So much wilderness, but somewhere below, more English, but no longer English. We're an island of language and faith, and I wonder what God wants from us. This one's called Beaver Pond. It's about development. The newspaper talks to me and the television interrupts. I'm clipping parts of my life to tape to the wall. All my hope has been downloaded and I can't remember where I saved it. Gone is the forest and the beaver pond where we played hockey as children. It is houses now in a street called Walden. Generations before ours lost so much more, but we learned to cry into the camera and into the microphone. Late at night I wonder, should I grind fair trade coffee or drink Nescafe? What is more authentic, you or me? Discount distractions and cultural ADD. This is the chapbook, Memory in Cities. It's about reflections on different places I've lived. And this one is for Gary Carter, who was a backpacker for the Montreal Expos, and he died in February 26, 2012. And growing up, he was one of my heroes. And this is called Back in Those Days. Back in those days, years seemed to last forever. Back in those days, we didn't measure time. Back in those days, there were no years, only seasons of hockey, baseball, and soccer. As far as we saw, there was no last year for a player, only last season. And back in those days, we chose our teams by their symbol, or the first game that we attended, or perhaps the team that our dads liked. A favorite team can be a family inheritance. And back in those days, your grandparents were lucky to be in Florida for spring training. And it was a curious thing called the Grapefruit League. And back in those days, we didn't Google for stats. We collected cards for all we needed to know. And then we tried to take those cards by playing topsies, throwing them against the wall. Well, it had its rules. Back in those days, I had hat head because I only took my Expos cap off for the school picture. Back in those days, you felt anxious if you didn't get your favorite player's number when the sweaters were handed out. And back in those days, we didn't know that some people don't like the Olympic Stadium. Back in those days, we played for hours with a tennis ball and a souvenir bat. Back in those days, garage doors were backstops and backboards. Back in those days, you learned how to imitate the cheer of a crowd with your voice. Back in those days, we wanted it to last forever, and we probably still do. So I'm writing a series of poems about malls, about relationships in malls, and because that's where it all happens. And so guy meets girl in food court, order fries. This is called Mall. For them, you will always be the cool guy who worked at the clothing store, forever a picture in their hearts. And you wonder, did concrete and glass actually feel the emotional moments, the courtships in the food court, and the season's greetings on the endless Christmas loop? And do we come here because we want to or because we have to? Nobody needs to know, and nobody needs to know what we're looking for. We went for a drive with the windows wide open, and I remarked upon that punctuation thing you do with your hands. We ended up at your place. And I remember them saying, you know, it might be a bit better if you tied it up before we came over. Don't think it would hurt to make a bit of an effort. And I remember one time when I wanted to do something, and they said, if your friend jumped off a bridge, would you? And later when you did, I was able to tell them no. Because I feared heights, but you the future. And this is called November River. I live right near the St. Lawrence River. November on the river is gray, but Christmas will come again. Jesus will be born again, and presents will be given. The future is writing dirty words on clean sheets, and I got a printing press and some ancient crinkled pages. There's no ice, so you can't walk on water this year, and the water is cold, but it flows, and our love is not landlocked. You copy out pages of the Bible to see if you have the nerve to change anything that's been written. And your thoughts chase each other around in the evening gloom, but they come back when they're called. You have them well trained. This is a poem. It's for a place called New Westminster. It's actually called New Westminster. A few years ago, it was the 150th anniversary of New Westminster, and it was on display in the City Hall here. And as I said, I grew up partially in the Lower Mainland when I was younger, and this is about those years in the mid-70s. Memory interrupted by daylight, by an easy history check. I thought I watched the New Westminster Bruins win the Memorial Cup with Meg, my best friend, back when we were living in Maple Ridge, back when it had just changed from being called Haney. But they didn't win the cup that year. They won it a year later when we were living in Toronto, and Mike had moved to Chilliwack, where I had visited him before we moved. Therefore, I think I know that we actually watched the 1975 final together. But I know, and I am positive, that we took swimming lessons at the Canada Games pool, because my mom has pictures. Thank you.